16th, 2025 Polk City Planning and Zoning Commission meeting to order. Roll call.
Here.
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 All right. Item number 3, approval of agenda.
So moved.
I'll make a motion that we approve the agenda as written.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. All right. Item 4, approval of P&Z Commission meeting minutes for May 19th, 2025.
I move that we approve the minutes from May 19th.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same. All right. Item 5, architectural design standards discussion. City engineer report.
All right, we're gonna be leaning pretty heavily into the stuff that was in the packet for you guys. Just kind of wanted to talk through what we had talked about a little bit, pretty briefly last month, but then getting into a little more detail. So included in the packet, we had the architectural standards section from Polk City Code. And then I went through, or staff went through and made a bunch of markups to that code section. Called out specific locations, specific questions, and then just because I'm more of a lists kind of person, our memo included some specific questions that are kind of highlighted in those code markup sections, but I think it's probably just going to be easiest for us to go through items 1 through, I think it's 8, and kind of talk through each one individually. So throughout the code markup section, you'll see the red rectangles. Those are places where we flagged as words like encourage, desirable, very, very interpretable language. So I guess the first question we had for this commission is, what are your feelings on those? Do you like having the flexibility of that interpretation? Would you rather up the strength of that language to be required, shall, things of that nature? Or are there specific places where you like the flexibility and specific places you want to change it, of the ones that we marked out? So I suppose the best way would be, so canopies, awnings, and similar portico coverings for windows and walkways are encouraged to add architectural character. So that would be something like an overhang over a window should be architectural in nature. It just shouldn't be some metal pipe frame thing that doesn't do anything for the building. How do we feel about strengthening that?
It gets tough because when, I would like the ability to have teeth to be tough when we want to be tough, but yet some buildings that would look ridiculous. Mm-hmm. And so you can't say that it's required when, would you want to put a canvas canopy on the, on a church or something like that? It's just, it would just look way out of place. And so I'm not sure what I would like to see it be stronger than encouraged, I guess. We kind of got a good lesson about flexible language last week, I guess, and want to have something that gives us more teeth to say no, is my opinion.
We've always used strongly encourage when we're doing contracts. It's a simple modifier, but.
And I think we've had pretty good luck in the past to be able to have some discussion with the developers on what they present, and they've taken our input pretty well. I'm not a big proponent of being real prescriptive either. I think it gives us some flexibility to leave it as loose as we can, and yet it is tough because you want it to look nice. Mm-hmm. You can't just say that, so. Right. Strongly encouraged I like that. I think that would,
In fact, maybe even shall strongly encourage might even be a step up.
Is there value in adding architecture character of the neighborhood or of the area? Because what you might have down on the square might be different than what you have out on Bridge Road.
true. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
One conversation Travis and I had was we wanted tonight to focus on commercial and industrial and come back to you on the town square stuff, probably in a few months, since that's such a specialized zoning district. So if that's okay with you all, we think that'd be a great winter project for us to tackle and bring it back to you in a few months. And then tonight we focus on commercial and industrial.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay.
Yep.
So then, are we okay with saying something to the effect of, and we'll wordsmith this, to match the character of the surrounding area? Something like that?
Yes.
Pitched roofs with gables, hips, dormers, or similar offsetting and intersecting roof lines are desirable for increased architectural interest. Strengthen that one, leave it as it is.
I'd say to strengthen that one, if we're looking for just different intersecting lines.
Okay.
Desirable, maybe.
I think when you were gonna put to match the character of the surrounding area, I think if we put it either on B or C, it should definitely be on C.
Okay. And we'll wordsmith this and you guys will actually review and approve the formal.
Yeah, so a shall be strongly encouraged might work there again
On B, yeah,
on C.
on C.
As well as
Okay.
B.
Okay,
We may want to remove shall for that one, just because that leaves some ambiguity. You're given like a may, shall, if process. I don't know what everyone's thoughts are on that.
Yeah, shall is normally a requirement, but when we shall encourage,
Yeah.
but we're still encouraging, we aren't requiring.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, normally shall means, darn it, it's gonna get done, but
Yeah.
darn it, we are gonna encourage it. I guess is the teeth we have.
So then this one's got a couple in it. Buildings proposed in commercial districts that are adjacent to residential developments are recommended to include an articulated roof line, giving emphasis to architectural elements that will help divide the mass of the large building into smaller identifiable pieces. Flat roof buildings shall not be encouraged. So this is kind of defining the whole nature of the neighborhood, where if you're directly adjacent to residential, your building should look residential. But then again, we're not disallowing flat roof buildings if you can make it look residential in nature. And then we're recommending that you include articulated roof lines. I think this one, maybe we don't touch right now and we look at what are some of the other architectural requirements we want to have, because this may be one where we fold some of the other things, like if you want, depth of your frontages or whatever it may be, this may be one where we can kind of wrap that stuff together, where you've got the articulation both on the frontage and on the roof itself. So I think we'll leave that one for now, and then we can kind of shape that based on the conversation later.
And some commercial buildings, the hardware store is a good example. We can't see if it's a flat roof or not.
Right.
Yeah, it's hidden.
Yep, exactly. And then this one I flagged just because adequate treatment is very, very subjective. And I think this one kind of goes back with the markup above as well. And this will be something we kind of talk about a little bit later, but clearly defining what it is that we want for screening. Right now, staff is administering it and kind of interpreting it as At maturity, that landscape buffer is gonna cut it so that you can't see the loading dock from the public right of way. If that's how this commission wants it to be interpreted, I think it probably makes sense to kind of beef that language up, tweak the language to make it clear what we're trying to accomplish. You know, maybe it's a reference to our type C buffer requirements, maybe it's a reference to shall completely screen at maturity. Maybe it's as simple as including language like that. So, do we have thoughts about what you're wanting to see as far as adequate screening of loading docks, loading areas, storage areas, trash enclosures, and HVAC systems?
I kind of like your idea of adequate screening at maturity. I think that makes sense. I mean, I think eventually we do want them screened.
And are we thinking we want it to be opaque, semi-opaque? I guess what are we looking for there? Because as it is now, basically the way we interpret this, a good example is Lakeside Fellowship Church. They've got the HVAC systems on the back side of the building. There's a solid privacy fence that screens those from view from the adjacent right-of-way of Edgewater Drive. I mean, that's how we interpret it. If you guys are fine with that interpretation, we can kind of beef it up to where it's kind of clear and it's less interpretive in terms of what we're trying to accomplish with that, but I also don't want to put words in your mouth. So if you're okay with that and you want us to do that, that's totally fine. But if you have a different opinion.
Yeah, I'm not thinking we want it to be opaque at all. Yeah, certainly. So I would say beef it up.
You don't want it opaque?
You don't, you don't want it.
Or you don't want it transparent at all?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, don't want it
Okay.
transparent at all.
Okay, so you're thinking opaque, and then maybe we put something to the effect of we can define a standard height from the right of way. You know, if you're standing on the sidewalk and you're 5.5 foot tall, that is our standard height, something like that.
And when we make that determination, do we take into consideration the elevation? As in, like, if your sidewalk is lower, does it make sense? You know what I'm saying?
So that would be why I think we define what height we're talking about from the adjacent sidewalk. Because Edgewater is a good example where I'm pretty sure they had to put a taller fence in there because it sat up above.
Yeah.
And we can do some research and determine what a standard height is, but. So that's kind of the vague language that we wanted to talk about. Item 2, define the terms permanency and strength as used in code. This could include provision of specification sheets for materials that demonstrate a particular lifespan or warranty duration. I talked to Corey Sharp, who is the architect of record on this building. And basically what he told me is pretty much every desirable material that's being used today, you could probably say it's gonna have some sort of warranty, some sort of justification, some sort of design lifespan in the 15 to 20 year range. So he thought that would be a good starting point, and then, you know, we can always make an adjustment if there's something out there that you guys find desirable that maybe is new on the market, so they're only warrantying it for 10 years, but you think it's a good product or something like that. So I guess that's kind of where we were thinking, going with the permanency and strength definition is a lifespan or a warranty length. The one thing he did say is, you know, it doesn't matter how long your warranty is, if the tenant doesn't take care of it, if the property owner doesn't maintain it, you're still gonna end up in a situation where it's gonna run down faster than it should. But does the commission have an idea of what kind of lifespan they want, or anything like that?
I think if you get in that 15, 20 year, you're getting into a better product, obviously. If you use 10 year, you're gonna have probably more of a house siding type of material. So I would say that's I would agree with his philosophy there. And I also was wondering if there would be any additional information from somebody like the gentleman you're talking about for definition of new products out there, because I know there's new stuff coming out every year, and I don't know generically what they call all these different products, but I've seen things around that I really like. But I don't know if you just call it metal siding, but this metal siding that looks like wood, or it looks like terracotta, or it can look like, but I've seen a variety of things like that around on newer buildings that I really like.
So I think after reviewing several codes around the metro, I think what a lot of communities are referring to that stuff that you're referencing is textured metal siding.
Maybe that's it.
So it's things like that.
Yeah.
Where they're not straight, vinyl looking steel siding. It's not the vertical ribbed stuff that you guys have explicitly prohibited, but it's got some texture to it. And I think that would be a situation where you could, if you're specifically talking about, maybe it's a textured metal siding that simulates the appearance of
Yeah.
wood,
That's what I had.
stone, stucco.
Right.
Okay.
And when we're talking about a material like that, are we wanting that to be replacing 100% of the brick requirement or a portion of the brick requirement?
So that is one that we're gonna get to, because
Okay.
I think that's a bigger discussion,
Okay.
is how this commission feels about architectural steel panels, replacing all that kind of stuff, so. So I'll get that cleaned up, and I think that kind of answers the permanency. So, the next big one I think is gonna be a really big deal here is addition of brick or stone proportions for the M districts. Specifically M1, we don't have anywhere in the future land use plan as of right now that is heavy industrial. Part of that is just the lack of interstate access that Polk City has. So the M1 for sure, we want to talk about, make sure that we have a comfort level. But what I would tell you is I think just if you applied it to both, it would be pretty reasonable. Jenny went through and averaged out the requirements across the metro. And of the communities that we polled, so Ankeny, Urbandale, Grimes, Indianola, Norwalk, Adel, I think there's one or two others, but a lot of the metro communities, what we found is that the average was 50% brick or stone, with the context being that almost always that percentage is less than what they require for commercial. And some of it was as little as 10% less, some of it was half. So just kind of giving you that added context of it's 50%, but it's almost always lower than the commercial. I think the one exception to that would be Bondurant. And it's because they specifically wrote their ordinance for those data centers. And so they had a very specific idea what they wanted in those data centers. And so theirs is actually higher than the commercial because of what they're trying to do with their downtown district versus what they wanted to do out there, that kind of stuff. So that would be the one exception. But does the commission have an idea of what they feel they want to require?
Can you remind me, what's our commercial?
Commercial is 60% if it faces a shared parking lot or public right of way, 50% for everything else.
I don't know, personally, I just, for manufacturing, it seems like 50% is heavy to me. Seems like a lot. Most of our manufacturing M zones are out farther out, not right on the main drags, coming into town, but, I just look at it from a construction perspective too. Cost may deter some companies from coming in if we put too much weight on that. I mean, that's my personal feeling. I would probably vote to lower it to 35% or something less. Something that still looks nice, but it doesn't have to be quite so heavy.
And this does not include glass on the,
If we write it the same way as your commercial, it is exclusive of glass. So it is non-glass, non-door material.
and I guess in the boat that it should be likely less than our commercial, but if you take a number too small and only half of half of the wall is glass and door, and generally you get some larger, or can have larger doors on an M1 building, you might end up with so little brick and stone that you can't see it, or it's unnoticeable.
I mean, that's true. I mean, if you look at well, as an example, Titan Storage, they I think if I remember right, their proportions, I'm not gonna pull that number. Out of nowhere, I'll pull that up, but I wanna say their proportions were in the 30s. My gut number, at least as a starting point, was 30 on right-of-way, 20 on non-right-of-way. There's no science, there's no specific reason for that. I just think that that's kind of a decent number, and then we can always, read and react. That's the thing, is if we get to the point where we're too far off. Oh, so actually Titan Storage, by the time you got these these dark columns in there, they were 48% stone, 52% steel on the sides that face the street. To give you some context of what that is. Now,
And that happens
These-
to have no windows or doors.
correct.
Yeah. And so if that had windows and doors, that would end up minimizing the appearance of the stone, because there'd be a lot less of it. Guess just to throw a number out, I would go for the 40 and 30 maybe.
And, some of it would be dictated by the architectural design too. I mean, that would be a minimum. What I threw out was a minimum, if they want to put 40% on,
Yeah.
I'm fine with that.
40-30.
Yeah.
40-30.
Seems to be a little lower than what we're seeing in other communities.
Yes.
Yeah.
I will say some of the average, that's probably just short of average. If you take some of the outliers out, because there are some that are like 60% brick because their commercial is 75% brick. Ankeny would be an example of that. But I think that 40-30 probably puts you really in a competitive spot. And then, if there's a situation where we get something that's really, really good and, they're coming in and saying, hey, at this price point, because we're paying for land and because of this, that, and the other, we'd be more comfortable at 35. Well, then if we do 35-25, I think that's something that we can kind of adjust to, particularly because we don't have anything to compare to right now. We don't have anything to talk about right now. And so it's something that we can kind of have a little bit of flexibility on.
And I guess, from my own perspective on a M zoning district, I would be more open to alternative materials other than brick and stone than I would be in a commercial district. I'm not sure how you put that into words, but that's my own perspective.
So something that a lot of communities do is they will do classes of materials, which is kind of what you guys do. Basically, for lack of a better term, Class A is your stone brick and all the acceptable alternatives. Class B is everything else. Class C are your prohibited materials. The way that we could do it is we could do brick and stone or Class A materials. Class B materials would be architectural steel panels with texture. and something else. And then in the commercial districts, A is the only thing that meets the stone and brick requirement. B and C then meet everything else, and D are prohibited. And then in the M districts, maybe you write it so that A and B meet that stone and brick requirement, and then C is everything else. That would be kind of the way that we could kind of puzzle piece it together, is if we,
Commercial, to do a B, you really need to get approval of council with a recommendation from
Right,
P&Z or
right.
something like that.
yeah. Yeah, well,
Are we saying brick and stone for Class A? What about things like exposed sandblasted concrete or precast? Would that fall into?
I think that would fall, because really the only question that we've had up to this point about an acceptable alternative is, what is an architectural steel panel, and do we still feel that it is an acceptable alternative to the stone and brick requirement? I think basically the way we've got it written is it's, for lack of a better term, the earthiness of those bricks, those stones, architectural concrete, stuccos, that kind of stuff, that's all acceptable stone and brick alternatives. I think we would continue to do that. I think the brick and stone, yeah. I think the only question would be is where do those architectural steel panels sit, and where, or what is an architectural steel panel? And we'll talk about that. Next one. Actually, let me make a note to myself here. Modification of the brick and stone proportions for residential and commercial districts. What I will tell you is residential, you're fairly low. I forgot to pull that number while I was putting this together. And then your commercial districts for facing the right of way are basically spot on with the average. I don't think from our perspective, based on what we're seeing, we would recommend a change to that, but I wanted the commission to have the opportunity to voice an opinion if they wanted to.
I would agree.
I would agree too.
Okay. Item 5, architectural steel panels. So as code is currently written today, architectural steel panels are an acceptable alternative to brick and stone. That 60% on commercial, the 15% on residential, and it's 30% on multifamily. The biggest question we had is, does this commission still feel that those architectural steel panels meet the intent of the brick and stone requirement? So when we're talking architectural steel panels, what we're thinking is the blue and silver panels on this building. That's kind of what we think when we think architectural steel panels. They're large, they're manufactured, and what they're intended to do is they're intended to simulate those large stone slabs or the large concrete slabs that you would see typically in that stone and brick requirement.
Out of curiosity on this building, did that material get into the brick and stone requirement, or was it actually being used as a non-brick and stone portion?
I don't know that we
Is that a
ever,
fair question?
I don't know that we ever answered that question, because it's brick or stone or that, and they had enough brick and stone to meet the requirement. So I don't know if we ever really contemplated that,
Okay.
to be honest with you, because they had enough brick as it was.
Well, that's what I meant. So
Yeah.
really the steel on this building, the steel panels are essentially the accent that was not part of the stone requirement. So, and so I'm not really aware of any building where we've used steel panels as a replacement for the brick stone requirement.
Do you like the possibility of it though?
Oh, well, that's what I mean. And I don't like the requirement of it being a total replacement for brick and stone. That's something I can easily say. Could it bump down the amount of brick or stone if indeed it was textured, but I think that's almost something we need to look at and can't easily put into words, in writing, I guess.
And what I will tell you is so because communities use these different classification of materials, in the packet, we kind of included that table, but if you read through those code sections, it's a little more complicated than what we were able to distill into that Excel file. But there are communities that will say all or X% has to be from Class A and Class B, but Class B cannot occupy more than half of the requirement for Class da-da-da.
Okay.
So I guess, is there a magic number for you guys? If you've got 60% frontage and 40% of it's stone, is that enough? Is 45% a better number? Is it 50? I guess.
Well, and also we need to better define what a steel panel is, I believe.
Yep, and
that's
that-
kind of a key that we got a lesson on last week.
And I think that 5 and 6 are kind of married together here, because in terms of what is an architectural steel panel and what is vertical steel siding, and then where does that line cross? So I think that's ultimately, I think in reading through the code section, looking through Kathleen's notes, who wrote the code section, what it seems to me is the intent of those architectural steel panels, they were meant to simulate a large stone installment. That's really what I'm interpreting that requirement to be, or what that option to be. So I think smooth steel panels probably don't meet that in a lot of ways, because almost every other material you're going to use is going to have some sort of texture to it. And I think it opens you up to a lot of interpretation that I don't think is beneficial. So I think we can kind of go back to the same thing where we were talking about, Doug was talking about that steel siding that has the texture to it. I think we could probably beef that up, saying it has to have texture, or it's a textured architectural steel panel that simulates an approved material. That's kind of the language I look at, and then the question becomes is, what proportion are you comfortable with it replacing of the stone? So if you got a 60% brick requirement on the front of a building, are you okay with 15% of the building being these architectural steel panels, with 45 of it being actual brick and stone? Or is it less than that, more than that? I think that's the question we're after.
That's tough too, because every building's so different. My first reaction was I'd be comfortable with half of it being, if it was the correct textured panel, but how do you define that? I'm not sure.
And I'm not sure I'm comfortable with half of the brick component being the textured, but half of the whole side of the building being the textured steel.
Yeah, that's design part
so
is
it's
difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think I don't know the dates of that update, but it seemed like this was around the time of the Lakeside Fellowship, when we didn't really have architectural concrete panels in our code. And so we were trying to update our code for for that building. And we were trying to get out in front of other materials that we might be missing, I think, is kind of how this all came into play. And so we've never really been tested on somebody dragging in something and saying, do you like this or don't you like this?
Is there a number low enough where it gets people to come in and ask us the questions and bring examples? So 5 or 10%, which is still feasible, but you get the people to ask.
I don't know that I have an answer for that. I think that's kind of why I landed on 15. I think 15 is reasonable. And, we're talking,
Of the building or of the facade or of the brick and stone requirement?
Of the 60% of stone or brick, you're
Yeah.
saying, right?
Percent of the 60, so it would be
60, okay.
12-ish percent, no, 8-ish percent
8-ish
of the building.
Yeah.
My math check out, Justin?
That sounds
Yes.
Probably right.
Okay. So maybe we start with that. You guys can think on that while we're drafting up a revised ordinance, and then we can kind of talk about it and maybe make a change if you continue to think about it and you feel differently.
I was just wondering if there's any verbiage like we were earlier talking that you didn't have to put a percent on it. Something about strongly recommend maintaining the highest percentage possible of the 60%. I don't know if that does anything to help us or not, because like I said, every building's so different. And somebody might come in with 20% and it really looks great. And we say 15% and they gotta do something different. I don't know. That's the tough part of it. I mean, we could start out at 15% and then if we run into issues, I guess we could always go back and visit that again.
Yeah, because I have concerns about putting new language in that's interpretive. Because that's part of the reason that we're going through this exercise is to kind of clean up some of that stuff, make it a little less ambiguous. So I think starting there probably makes a lot of sense. And then we can kind of see what kind of reactions we get. We could also, as we're putting this together, because you're right, Ron, I don't know, outside of this building, I can't think of anything unless, I would have to look at like,
P&M has it up top, but it was not as a brick replacement. It was part of their non.
Yeah.
the only other one, scooters may have it, but I don't know if it was used as a brick replacement or not. I'd have to go look at that
I
one.
don't think so, because I think that has more brick than any scooters you'll see on it.
Yeah. And Quick Star would be brick with siding. Ace is brick with like that simulated stucco. Home State Bank is brick, and I don't remember what the top of it is, but I don't think it's an architectural steel panel. So yeah, I'll have to go look and see if there's anything that I can pull when we're looking through this, but I think that's probably a good place to start.
Okay, but I think currently we're kind of looking at it as an accent, not not as a total replacement.
So are you good with the 15%?
Oh, yeah, I'm good with 15. I'd be good with 20. I mean, that will still be 48% brick, or whatever, if I'm doing the math right. And, yeah, so somewhere in that range, I'm comfortable with. I'm just, wondering if those accents could have gone in as just a portion of the non-brick and stone part of the facade, and why we're cutting back at all. But yet, I'm kind of interested in seeing new ideas and new materials as well.
Yeah, I mean,
But we have to make sure our language is such that we're critical about what those are.
I think that would be the other possibility is maybe that's the path we go down instead is, are architectural steel panels even an acceptable replacement, or are they just an acceptable material for the other 40%? That makes it really easy to interpret.
Yeah.
Or your percentages stay the same and then have it worded to where unless.
That's what I was kind of wondering.
Yeah.
Then they'd have to
Maybe
bring anything
approved.
outside of it for approval. They need to see renderings and see if you like it.
And I mean, there's all sorts of sentences like that in your code where unless specifically waived. So maybe that's,
Yeah, I hate doing that too much, but this might be a spot where it would be nice to use that.
so we move architectural steel panels out of
Except
the replacement for brick and steel, or brick and stone. And then, but we put a blurb in there about P&Z and council having the ability to specifically allow certain materials. Okay.
Do we run into any risks with that where someone may come in and say, we're not approving for X reason?
Well, I mean, I think that the way that we would write it, language-wise, if they don't meet the 60%, you have every grounds to deny their waiver.
Okay.
I think that gives you the flexibility to adjust to a unique situation, but it doesn't open you up to interpretation. Because right now, it's just, there's too much interpretation, I think.
Yeah.
I think that's the problem, mostly.
Well, I guess I'm wondering if we can just add a little bit extra to it, so we're not coming in with someone with just pure steel panels. That they're coming in with a
Oh.
stone, yeah,
I see what you're saying, where under no circumstances would an architectural steel panel be allowed to fully replace.
correct.
So then I guess, does that go back to, is 20% the absolute maximum you would allow, or?
Well, I thought we were going back to it just being we're sticking with the 60 brick and stone or concrete. And,
Well, so maybe then instead of doing a percentage, because what Alex is saying is you're never gonna want them to fully replace it.
correct.
So then maybe it's just maybe we just say that, under no circumstances will a waiver be approved, completely replacing the brick and stone with an architectural steel panel.
Could you put something where it's like, so if we know that it's a minimum of, I don't know, 40% of the 60%, this is a bare minimum, period, and then the other is if it's allowed. So then it's more clear that under no circumstances should that come in front of the commission where it would even be an option.
So are you saying, because the hard part about percentages is what are you percenting out? Are you saying, when you say the 40%, are you talking 40 of the 60, 2/3 of it would be stone and brick?
Period, or whatever that number is, but it is a bare minimum that is not replaceable by anything else. And then anything from that point, from the, whatever that number is, to the maximum, or not necessarily the maximum, that portion would have to be approved.
Is 2/3 enough? Good starting point, and you can kind of think about this too. We just want to have something to be able to put together so you guys can review and comment on it. Is 2/3 too much, not enough?
So that'd be 2/3 of the 60%.
So you would be at 40 total percent.
Of the side, and then would still be having a good chunk of architectural steel panels that are textured to simulate approved material.
But if that would have to then be specifically requested and
And
approved, then,
So we would
then there
probably-
would be
we'd
some
see the
flexibility,
material.
exactly.
Yeah. So I'm good with that.
And I'm assuming that this all works out when you make your category A of only this, right? Okay, sorry, I'm just trying to.
Yeah, that's kind of where I think this is all going, is I think we'll probably end up with categories. And I mean, effectively, that's kind of the way the code's written now. Maybe it's just we're a little more prescriptive in how we refer to those things.
Before we go on to 6, I guess it is. If, just above, in the code, just above where we were on B4 is B3, which is, it says architectural, concrete, or stone panels. I wonder if that definition could be expanded. I really liked the Windsor, no, it was the Ankeny C1 halfway down. They talk about architectural textured, not smooth face, concrete masonry units, including split face, weathered face, sandblasted face, or ground face, precast concrete. So something a little more descriptive than architectural concrete. That's just an idea when I was reading through some of the other cities, it seemed like we were pretty brief there.
And if the commission's okay with that, I would agree. I liked the way that they defined that. Windsor Heights, I like the way that they do
Yeah, that
the
was the other one.
depth and the cutouts and that kind of stuff. So that could be something that we simulate with some of the other requirements. Item 6, what's the difference between an architectural steel panel and vertical steel siding?
Well, I think we have a big step with our new description of architectural steel panel. So it needs to appear as though it is, a piece of granite, or has the texturing to simulate that. And if your vertical steel siding, was big enough and wide enough, it could pass. But if it's, 10 inches wide with ribs, it's not gonna pass.
So I guess the bigger question is something like what Dollar Tree showed. So there's an ambiguity there in the code of they had concealed fastener, smooth face siding that was somewhere between 10 and 16 inches wide. I'm not remembering right offhand. But it was vertical. So then the question became, right, you allow steel horizontal lap siding. If they had flipped that horizontally, is that an acceptable building material?
But does that simulate the approved materials?
I think we've answered the question of is it a stone and brick replacement, which is no. But I think it's more so, is it a prohibited material or not?
Well, I think the horizontal siding was more getting back to the residential look. Whereas vertical siding does not give us a residential look. It is kind of how I think we got there.
Well, and I think,
And so I was not happy at all with, what portion are you talking about on the sides and back, or are you talking about the flat part on the front? They had some vertical siding on the front also that
Right.
was flat.
So I think more so those are the ones I'm talking about. It would have been the red and it was like a dark gray on the fronts and sides up on where the Dollar Tree sign was. Would you consider that vertical steel siding? And would you consider that an acceptable material where stone and brick are not required?
Well, when I look at the P&M building up high, granted, it's more squares as I recall, but it is, if that had been narrower, I would not have, more rectangular and in a vertical fashion, I guess I would not have considered it an issue. And it had everything hidden. It looks like a flat piece of black metal up there. You can barely see the seams.
What I would say is, if you're interpreting it that way, I would say that is consistent with the way you just interpreted and approved Titan storage.
And I would just add that the interpretation that you have, as clearly as we can just define it, makes it easier to have some of these conversations when people are calling the city firsthand, which is how we ended up where we ended up with this last person, because they're asking very specific questions that aren't fine, where I'm having to then try to articulate to the person on the phone that my interpretation and understanding of what the commission wants is this. But yet the code doesn't say that. So that's kind of where we're going with, can we a depth, a width, something on it so that I can say, no, this doesn't meet code.
Or what some communities are doing, because they're trying to accomplish the same thing, what they use is the terms corrugated and ribbed are not allowed.
I think the ribbed is what gives you a lot of the look that
That we don't like.
we
Yeah.
don't like.
right?
But if this P&M panels, there was maybe 2.5, 3 feet wide?
Something like
If
that.
those had been 1 foot wide,
You know, like,
and, no, I think I would have still.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, I think I would have still liked it because you can't really even see the seams. It kind of looks continuous the way it is. So there was just something about the example from last week where it was so glossy white. It just came across looking very machine sheddy, I guess. And whereas this is a lot flatter and textured.
So maybe we start there. Maybe it's vertical steel panels are okay, even if they're not simulating the stone and brick as an acceptable material, but then ribbed and corrugated metal siding are still not allowed. Maybe that's the change we make. We good with that?
I think that probably catches most of it. I mean, I don't disagree with you, and it's hard to name a width when, if there's a product out there you like and you're kicking it out, but
Or the concealed fasteners.
I think that's definitely important.
I'm not 100% sure, but I think the better panels are wider. I think they're gonna be 24 inches or more. Those are in particular are the same panels that we have in the church, and they're 30 inches wide. And you're right, Ron, because they're short, they look square. But if you had 12-inch panels on our church that are 30 foot tall, you wouldn't like it at all.
That's what I was wondering too.
You know, so I was almost thinking maybe 24 inches a minimum, but, again,
And I'd be happy with,
24 probably gets you out of that.
yeah. And the other thing is, when you texture it, you eliminate that oil can look that I think we were getting the other time and Dollar Tree. It was oil can all over, and it just looked horrible, I thought, whatever product they had. Now, there's other smooth panels that probably look better, but the texture takes that away. It diffuses the light. Might still be a little oil can, but you don't see it as much.
Okay. Okay, I think that gives us enough to run with where we can kind of take a shot at that.
But still, if I look at the panels on this building, if we go back to the simulating improved materials, do you think they simulate an improved material?
I don't, I mean,
They don't have to in this situation.
yeah, effectively, I don't think so because they're smooth.
Right, that's kind of where I'm at too. It's not a,
I think to simulate it, you'd almost have to have them stamped, or you'd have to do some sort of,
yeah.
I don't even know how you would do it, to be honest with you. Whether it's a molded product that kind of gives that simulated look. I wonder if maybe like a steel ephes product where it's got the insulation right behind it and it goes up as a singular unit, that may be functional enough to do that. But I'm not sure if I've ever seen a product that really would do that, but I think having the language to be able to do that, I think is perfectly okay. Okay, so 7 and 8, again, are kind of paired together. We're gonna kind of pivot a little bit in terms of kind of what started this whole conversation, right? Is how do we want garages, accessory structures, and then more broadly, multifamily structures to look? So I guess the questions we'd like to ask, are there specific residential elements that you would like to require on non-single-family buildings in residential districts? And then at what frequency would you want visual interest structures? So recesses, projection, columns, openings, ornamentations, things like that. Windsor Heights had a good one where, what was it? It's every 20, no wall greater than 20 feet without some sort of visual interruption. We kind of so a lot of the stuff that I listed in item 7, the pitched roofs, the dormers, the cupolas, and other residential roof elements, we encourage those. That's one of the things we looked at earlier. It's encouraged, but it's one of those things where do we have a specific number we're looking for, or is that one that we're gonna know what we don't like, and we can kind of just interpret as we go? where we just kind of say the building's gonna be residential in nature, it needs to have a pitched roof, and then we move on from there. I think that may be a question that has never really been contemplated, but figured we would ask since we're having this conversation. And I think 8 is probably more in line with the questions that we've been asking.
You suggested the Windsor height verbiage, that's pretty good. 20 feet.
Yeah, and I think that's not super restrictive in terms of if somebody wanted to basically frame around an apartment. I think that gives them enough space to be able to do that in most situations. I think that's a good starting point. And again, this one's gonna be field tested in the probably not too distant future. So that's always something that if there's something that they wanna do, that then they're like, hey, we can't do it because of this, this, and this, well, then the commission can then make a modification, but if you don't have anything to start with.
I would like to see, I guess, something more specific and maybe a longer distance than 20 feet, but something that would incorporate recesses or something protruding. So that you don't end up with a long flat building with some visually interesting things, like some, little fake ornamentation along there. Would like to have some protruding, things or recessed items, whether it be, an apartment or a strip mall or a threeplex. Or something like the townhomes on Parker, have something where the front has to have some variability in it. And certainly probably more than 20 feet, but I'm not sure what that number should be.
So maybe we pivot then and we don't include openings, columns or ornamentation in those requirements, and it's.
Well, no, I think I like the idea of having something from this list every 20 feet.
Okay.
But then in addition to that, maybe every 60 feet needs to be a recessed area or a protruding area, something to break up the monotony of the straight line of the front of the building.
Okay.
It's just through 60 feet out there as being something larger than 20.
So then you could do a minimum of 20 spacing wise. And then you could write it, and in no circumstance shall 60 feet of a facility be, what would the correct terminology be? Like have the same setback. That's not the right terminology, but I think I understand what you're saying, where it's like, we want something every 20 feet or more, but then we want that vertical element. If you've chosen every 20 feet to have a recess or a protrusion, then you're good. We'll move on. But if you haven't given us that depth variability, then every 60 feet you need to do that.
And some of that is scale too. I mean, if you have a long apartment building, maybe every 60 feet is great, or maybe even every 80 feet if you have a long apartment building. But if, you have a fourplex of townhomes, if you have 60 feet, that's probably only one break. And, to where the shorter the building is, kind of the shorter that number of frequency needs to, as I would look at it from a scale perspective.
So then maybe we could do a percentage or we could do a rate. Those would be the two ways that you could handle that, where no structure, or every structure shall have no less than 2 protrusions or recesses. 3, whatever that is, whatever that number is. Or you could do no more than 25% of the building shall be at a continuous depth from the street or something like that. I mean, is there Is there a preference?
There's a sentence in, under C1, under Windsor Heights, says buildings constructed shall be designed to sustain interest throughout the entirety of the building's exterior and reduce the appearance of a box or cube. Something like that. Individual buildings within a planned retail center, office park, similar environments. And it goes on, I can't read the rest of it there, but is that what we're trying to get at, is really, we don't want it, we want some interest on that wall, not just a box.
Yeah.
Look, which is kind of, I think what you're saying, Ron, is like,
Correct.
at some point, 60 feet or whatever it is, it starts to just look like a box again.
Does it have to have a protrusion, or could it be a change in materials, or
It could be.
something to break up the visual?
Well, as you look at the townhomes on Parker, which were built to our code, I mean, want to make that perfectly clear, they didn't do anything wrong. You know, they have changes in material. Each building has slightly different gables up top, but really
Can you pull that one up?
but the front of the roof never varies.
I know that.
Yeah, and so the depth of that, you know, just never changes.
I've seen more when they do the whole material change every so often, looks like a separate building, but
Yeah, and I've, boy, I brought from last week, there was a example of that on, one of the backs of the garages. It didn't really come off that well, because it was just flat all the way across, and they switched it from gray to white and put a gable on top, but it looked
didn't
flat.
like it.
Yeah.
It looked flat. And as you go up and down the string, each building is slightly different. So there is, you know, shutters are different and the gables are different. You know, so they did do some, but still you see the whole front of the building is flat. And the roof line is really flat all the way across there. And it didn't really provide much interest, particularly with a row of them. And I guess the question is do we want more like this build, or do we want something that offers a bit more interest and variability?
Because in theory, if they had a recessed door, like two of those doors, that would meet what you're talking about, right? Sometimes, you know, how townhomes, like if they sat back.
Yeah.
Even just, you know, so then you have an overhang too for your different, yeah.
Right.
I mean, that might, so there is that,
And break it up some.
break it up and,
Yeah.
Or the other thing is you could take this center section and you could pull it forward too, and that would have been really easy with these.
Yeah, that would really help.
So is there, I think the way that I would do it, or the way I'm leaning right now, would be a proportion of that building. So is it, I guess let's look at these as an example. How many changes in depth would you want to see on these?
I would say at least two.
15%.
Maybe back up and back again.
Well, yeah, two, yeah, so 3 sections, so 2 changes, I guess.
So then I think what we could do is no portion of the building, or no more than 33% of the building shall be at a continuous depth from the property line, or something like that. We'll figure out how to write it, but you think that's a good starting point?
Well, and again, that's on a building this size.
Right.
If you had an apartment building, you know, 10 times longer than this, you would want to have more than 2 changes.
Right.
Yeah.
This is a PUD, isn't it? This is a PUD, isn't it?
I don't believe so.
It's not. Is this R3 then?
This building?
No,
The
these that we're
townhomes.
looking at, yeah.
I haven't-
I'd have to look into that, because that would be the way that you could do it. Or you could do it on a threshold. If it's a row home, no more than a third of it can be on a single depth. If it's an apartment building, do you go up to 4? Do you go up to 5? 5 probably makes sense. Yeah.
threshold, because then you don't have to determine what you could
Does that sound like a good starting point? Row home, townhomes, we do three, at least three different or depths, and then apartments, we do at least five? That seem like a good starting point?
Yeah.
And then would you want the
And
ornamentation,
this is in addition to the rest of it being every 20 feet.
20 feet, or would you do a proportion as well? Because you could double it. Although you were doing, if you use 20 and 60, you would triple it. You could triple it.
I would prefer to see a proportion, just because when you start doing proportions or fractions and you incorporate the feet, you might get some overlap somewhere that doesn't make sense, or a skip, or an off, a bush right next to a door and then 3 spaces.
Yeah. So would you say so at least 3 sections that have different depth, and then would we do 6 or 9 ornamentations, I guess would be your idea? So one third would have visual difference, and then is it 1/9 of the visual interest?
Boy,
Might be good.
particularly since we're now talking about row houses, which could be, they could be 40 feet wide, or they could be, 15 feet wide. And so,
Or do we do a third and 6 on the row homes and townhomes, and then a 5th and a 10th on apartment buildings?
so yeah,
So a 200,
get 2 items of interest per,
and the recesses count as 1.
yep, that sounds good.
Okay. We'll go down that path then. Okay, I think that gives us what we need to get started. We'll get this put together, and then we'll have an actual ordinance modification to review. Is there anything else? I guess, so we would write this so that so like apartment building, accessory structures and garages would have the same requirements. Is there something different we want to do with that? We already know too that we want to have them give articulated roofs that are in the same nature and character of the primary structures themselves. Is there anything else that you would want us to take a shot at when we put the ordinance together
For the,
for the garages?
for the garages, I think we need some sort of recessed or protruding area for something, anything over, let's say, 60 feet. If the building gets longer than 60 feet, it needs to have some changes in variability.
So if we go over 60 feet, would you want a similar rate to what the primary structures are, or would it be less?
Or come up with a distance that each time you exceed that distance in its length, then you need to have another change in the setback of the building. So, and I threw 60 out there, I guess that would only be,
That would probably be about 4 parking stalls.
4 parking stalls. And, and so for every time you have 4 parking stalls, then you need to do a kick out or setback, or you could just have 1 kicked out and the rest, staying back, but some sort of variability every 60 feet or 80 feet. I don't know what the right number is. And then also have items of interest from that list.
Okay. Okay, I think that gives us what we need. We should be able to take it.
Just a quick item, the way this was organized in our packet was very helpful to have us step through it. It kind of made it real easy to review, so appreciate that.
Good? Okay.
Okay, no other commission feedback on that? All right. Item 6, reports and particulars, council liaison.
Good afternoon, Commission. I mean, evening, sorry, it's been a long day for me. You guys laugh, so hopefully you got it. It's been a couple months since I was here, so just in a matter of time, I'll provide a few updates. I know last time I was here that we were working through our 2026 budget, which our fiscal year starts at the end of this month, 1st of July. Good news is we got that half any changes to our assessed levy, so that's pretty good. Being able to add some additional head count and move forward with some additional operational purchases. One thing I do want to call out that I think is people should be aware of is the city has signed a agreement with Iowa DOT, Ankeny, and Allure to do a traffic study out on 415th and 44th Street. So that's going to be starting sometime here.
We are still waiting for the agreement from Polk County, and then
Okay.
we can get started.
Okay, so that's going to be good to kind of understand traffic flows and impacts coming in and out of our community. The other couple items just to call out is we updated our fireworks ordinance recently and then updated it again. We updated it to reflect some of the changes from the state that passed recently. And then we had to do another update to that to make sure we weren't excluding certain residents based on being close to combustible like gas stations. More importantly, I think this is a good update. If no one watched our working session last Monday, unfortunately I was out of town on business, but when our bond referendum failed last winter, the mayor established a municipal park committee of, I think, 10 individuals, somewhere around there, and tasked that committee with coming up with a different approach, a different strategy on how we can move forward and utilize the ground, as you guys all know, that we own out there. Something that we can move forward without such a big fiscal expense right now. So the committee came to the council in the working session last week and made a recommendation to move forward, and hopefully Chelsea will correct me if I get any of this wrong, but to start out with a couple soccer fields and a couple areas for practice for softball and baseball, as well as parking and I believe restrooms. So the next step is we're gonna work on seeing how we could leverage some of our TIF money to be able to help fund that, as well as some other opportunities for to get funds from either a loan or something like that, so we could at least move forward and get something out there that's desperately needed. Did I miss anything?
No, you did great.
As well as doing a couple updates potentially out at the sports complex. Last thing I wanted to mention too is we're about 2 weeks away, a week and a half from our festival. They're still looking for volunteers, so spread the word if you can. I just signed up myself, so I'll be out there helping tear stuff down and set stuff up. And I think that's it. Any questions for me?
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
City manager,
I don't have anything. Thank you.
thank you. Staff,
A project that was recently, looks like we've got their rough rating finished through.
Good.
all right, thank you. Commission?
Just a quick question, I guess, for staff. Did we hear anything back from the Dollar Tree? So no
Just been no
additional
follow-up.
communications? Okay.
I thank the commission for their time. That was the follow-up we've had so far.
Any other commission?
I do. I'd like to take a minute of the commission's time to address some comments I made at the last meeting, last month. After a recent meeting with the mayor, he requested that I apologize to the current management at TCI. I agree with that and apologize publicly to him for any offense that he may have taken from my comments. I'd also like to apologize to the members of the commission for if I made you feel uncomfortable or took you back on my comments. I apologize. Clearly, our street has some strong feelings and we need to work with TCI to get through that. And we are looking forward to having a better relationship.
Thank you. No other comments? All right. We need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor if we have to do that part.
All right.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.